I never thought a Tuesday afternoon at the repair shop could feel like a confession waiting to happen. But there I was, leaning against the counter, pretending to organize invoices while stealing glances at her. She moved through the space like she owned it, though not in that loud, brash way. More like she carried the kind of quiet command that made people notice without realizing why. Every step she took was measured, deliberate, the kind of grace that felt impossible to mimic. "Can you check the wiring on this one?" Her voice cut through the low hum of machines, warm but edged with that subtle authority I couldn't stop listening for. She held the device out to me with a hand that seemed too soft for the hard edges of the tools we both used. Her fingers brushed mine, just barely, and I felt a jolt, like static electricity passing through something I didn't even know existed inside me. I mumbled something about it being fine, tried to focus on the wires, but the way her eyes lingered on me, gray-blue, like storm clouds just before rain, made my chest tighten. She noticed. I could tell, because she tilted her head just so, a half-smile touching her lips, almost playful, almost indifferent. And then she was gone, moving to another workstation, leaving the smell of her perfume behind, faint but sharp enough to make the air feel charged. I told myself it was nothing. She was confident, experienced, her life clearly mapped out in ways mine wasn't yet. I was just me, younger, impatient, fumbling with the edges of conversations, fumbling with the edges of attention she gave me without realizing it. But when she returned, leaning over the counter to point something out in a manual, I caught her gaze longer than necessary. Neither of us said a word, and yet the silence spoke. She laughed quietly at a joke I hadn't intended to make, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and I wondered how someone could hold so much life in a single glance. The moment hung between us, electric and unclaimed, like a storm we were both waiting for but afraid to start. I wanted to reach out, to say something, anything, but my words seemed to vanish the second they formed. Then came the small kindness. She handed me a coffee without asking, muttering, "You look like you need it." Her hand brushed mine again, but this time I didn't recoil. I let it linger a fraction longer than propriety allowed. She looked at me, and I swear she paused, sensing something unnamed in that fleeting touch, but said nothing. Just turned back to her work as if nothing had happened. And there it was, the spark. A quiet, almost imperceptible moment of recognition that something, whatever this was, had started. She was a storm, and I was standing too close, feeling the first drops, already soaked. I left the repair shop that evening thinking about the way she'd tilted her head when she smiled, the weight of her silence, the brief warmth of her hand against mine. I couldn't stop replaying it. Even now, hours later, the memory made my chest tighten and my mind wander. I didn't know what she felt, or if she even noticed me beyond the surface. But I knew this. When she said nothing, when she just let the moment exist between us, she had already said more than words ever could. And somehow, I found myself whispering into the quiet of my apartment. Not yet. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. But there she was, standing by the delivery van in the back lot, the late afternoon sun catching the edges of her hair and making it glow like fire against the dull metal of the truck. She had that same controlled posture, shoulders squared, expression neutral, like nothing could touch her, but I noticed the slight slump in her back when she thought I wasn't looking. "Need a hand with that?" I asked, stepping closer, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, and I saw it, just for a fraction of a second, the almost imperceptible falter in her eyes, a crack in the armor she wore so well. Sure," she said, voice steady but softer than usual. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the crate she was lifting, and I saw the faint tremor, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. Something about it made my chest tighten. I wanted to ask if she'd eaten lunch, if she'd slept, anything, but the words felt intrusive. We worked together in silence, our hands occasionally brushing while moving boxes. Every tiny contact sparked a tension that neither of us acknowledged. I noticed the way her knuckles whitened when she gripped something heavy, the subtle tightening of her jaw when she focused, and the quiet laugh she gave when a box tipped slightly and she swore under her breath. Small details, small human truths. But to me, they were everything. She shifted her weight, leaning against the van for a moment, and I caught her glance. Quick, wary, as if she might be inviting me in and instantly regretting it. I held her gaze just long enough to let her know I saw it, but not so long as to press. She looked away first, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and I felt a rush of something unnameable, a mix of wonder, longing, and careful restraint. I think I'm done here, she murmured, almost to herself. Her voice carried a note of fatigue, but also a quiet defiance. I wanted to tell her she could lean on me, just for a second, just for a moment, but she was already turning away. I stepped a little closer, hesitant, letting my presence speak instead of words. She paused mid-step, as if sensing the pull between us, that invisible line we weren't supposed to cross. Then, for a fraction of a heartbeat, her hand brushed mine again, not by accident, not fully intentional either, but enough to leave a charge in the air. Her eyes flicked up at me, guarded but curious, and the faintest corner of her mouth lifted in a half-smile. Maybe an apology, maybe an invitation. I wanted to reach out, to ask her to stay in that moment a little longer, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch, thick and electric, knowing that the memory of it would follow both of us long after she walked away. As she disappeared around the corner, I lingered, hand hovering in the empty space where hers had been, whispering under my breath, almost to myself, "I'll wait." The rain hit the windows and sheets, a steady drumming that made the small office feel like its own world, shut off from everything else. She was there, leaning over a stack of invoices, sleeves rolled up, hair damp at the nape of her neck. I wanted to comment, wanted to say something casual, but every time I opened my mouth, the words caught in my throat. "I thought you left hours ago," I said instead, trying to sound neutral. "I needed to finish this," she murmured, not looking up. Her voice was soft, almost confessional, and I realized I was holding my breath. Every small movement she made, the way she shifted her weight, the brush of her sleeve against her arm, felt amplified, like the world had shrunk to just her and me. For a moment, we shared the same space without speaking, and it was electric. My hand hovered near the papers she was organizing, just a hair's breadth away from touching hers. I wanted to let it happen, let her know how close I was to losing control, but I didn't. I couldn't. Then her phone buzzed on the desk, and the screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. She froze, glanced at it, and her shoulders stiffened. I knew better than to ask, better than to intrude. The barrier slammed back into place, and I stepped back, feeling the pull of proximity fade into something more painful, restraint. "You okay?" I asked, voice softer this time. She gave me a small, distracted nod, tucking a strand of wet hair behind her ear. But I saw it. The tightness in her jaw, the momentary flicker of something unspoken in her eyes. She wanted to say more, maybe invite me in, maybe push me away, and I had no choice but to wait. The storm outside mirrored the tension inside the room. Thunder rolled low, shaking the windows, and for a brief second, she looked at me, really looked, like she might tell me something she'd been holding back. My pulse quickened. The distance between us was small, almost non-existent, and I imagined a world where I could close it completely. Instead, she stood and stretched, the faint creak of the office chair under her signaling the moment's end. My hands itched to reach for hers, to stop her from leaving, but I let her move, let her retreat behind the invisible line she had drawn so many times before. She paused at the door, back to me for just a heartbeat, and I swore I saw her hesitate, as if even she wanted to stay in that suspended moment. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And then she was gone. I stayed there, hands still hovering where hers had been, thinking of the almost smile she hadn't allowed herself to give. The room felt emptier, colder, but somehow heavier too, like the weight of everything unsaid had settled between us. I whispered into the echo of the storm, "Not yet, not yet." The shop was empty except for us, the fluorescent lights humming softly overhead. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. I had been pacing, trying to find the right words, but the quiet was almost unbearable. Every tick of the clock seemed to echo the space between us. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, hesitant, as if saying it out loud made it dangerous. "What are we doing?" The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were a question, I had asked myself that 1,000 times, but because she said them. She said them to me. The vulnerability in her tone, the pause before the question, the small catch in her breath. I felt it in my chest, sharp and unfamiliar. I don't know, I admitted, keeping my voice soft. I wanted to reach for her, but I stayed still, afraid of crossing a line I wasn't sure existed. She looked up then, and our eyes met. For a long, tense moment, we just stared. Not at each other, exactly, but through the invisible space that had formed between us. I noticed the faint crease at the corner of her mouth, the way her fingers flexed against her forearms, the quiet tremble in her shoulders. She was holding herself together, yet somehow unraveling all at once. I can't pretend this is normal," she said finally. Her voice cracked slightly, just a whisper, but it carried everything she hadn't been able to admit before. I thought I could. I thought I could handle it. But I can't. I swallowed, unsure what to do. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I understood, but my own emotions were too tangled, too loud in the silence. I could only watch as she shifted slightly, leaning into the counter, her face half hidden, half exposed. The room was too quiet. Even the distant hum of the machines felt like it had stopped, like the world itself was holding its breath. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but I couldn't. So I stayed, letting the silence stretch, letting the unspoken truths hover between us. And then she said it. "I don't even know if I should want this, or if I'm allowed to." Her words hung in the air, fragile and jagged, and I felt the weight of them pressing down on me. I had no answer. How could I? We were two people teetering on the edge of something unnamed, and the line between desire, fear, and confusion had blurred entirely. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to tell her that she could want it, that it was allowed, but the moment passed before it began. She pulled back slightly, retreating into herself, and I realized that what I wanted most was not to force the next step, but to hold the space for her uncertainty, even if it meant my own frustration. She turned toward the door slowly, never meeting my eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might leave without a word. Then, almost inaudibly, she whispered, "I don't even know if I'm ready to be found." And with that, she was gone, leaving me staring at the empty space she had just occupied, my chest aching with the quiet devastation of someone who had finally said what I had been feeling all along, but in a way I could never fix with words. I found her sitting on the loading dock, legs tucked under her, staring at a faded photograph in her hand. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and damp, clinging to our clothes. I didn't know whether to speak, to step closer, or to give her the space she seemed to need. "Do you ever remember?" she asked without looking at me. Her voice was low, fragile, as if saying the words aloud could break her. "Remember what?" I asked cautiously, not wanting to intrude, but unable to stay silent. She finally lifted the photograph, a picture of a man smiling at a beach I didn't recognize, his arm around her shoulder. I noticed the subtle tremble in her fingers, the way her eyes glossed over without tears falling. "My ex, he." She hesitated, swallowed, then shook her head. "It's stupid. I think about him sometimes, even now." I didn't speak. I just watched her, noticing the way her shoulders slumped as if carrying decades of unspoken grief, the way her lips pressed together like she was holding herself from breaking. For a moment, she seemed younger, smaller, a side of her I'd only glimpsed in fleeting moments. "You're not him," I said quietly, almost to myself, but she heard. She looked up, startled, eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like hours. "I know," she whispered, but there was a shadow behind her words, a weight I couldn't lift. "It's not about you. It's about everything I lost, everything I thought I couldn't survive." I shifted closer, careful to respect the distance she still demanded. "You survived," I said softly, "or you wouldn't be here, standing, holding this, remembering him without breaking completely. She exhaled slowly, a sound more like release than relief. It's just, I didn't expect anyone to see me like this. Not really. I nodded, understanding without judgment. There was something about seeing her vulnerability, the raw edges of her heart she never showed anyone, that made my chest tighten. I wanted to reach for her hand, to let her know she didn't have to carry it alone, but I stopped. Respect. Patience. The unspoken rules we had carved out between us. She tucked the photograph into her jacket pocket and glanced up at me with that half-smile, the one that never fully reached her eyes but suggested she wanted to trust me anyway. "Thanks for noticing," she said softly, almost as a confession, almost a question. I smiled, a quiet, careful smile, because words felt clumsy here. I wanted to say more, to tell her that seeing her like this didn't scare me away, that it only made me feel closer. But instead, I just nodded. We stayed there for a few more moments in silence, letting the rain-soaked world around us settle, letting the photograph and the weight it carried exist between us without forcing it into conversation. Then she finally stood, brushing the damp from her sleeves, and for a heartbeat, our hands brushed again. Unintentional, fleeting, but it left a charge that neither of us could ignore. She turned to leave, but just before she disappeared around the corner, she whispered, "Don't let me forget this again." And I knew she wasn't asking me to remember the photograph or the man in it. She was asking me to remember her, fully, in all the quiet, unspoken ways she was still figuring out herself. The shop was nearly empty that evening, the overhead lights dimmed to a soft yellow glow. She was sitting on a low stool, sketching something on a scrap of paper, fingers smudged with pencil graphite. I stood nearby, pretending to straighten tools, but really just watching. The way the light fell across her face, the way she occasionally bit her lip in concentration. "I didn't think I'd stay this late," she murmured, eyes still on the paper. Her voice carried neither apology nor expectation, just a quiet honesty that made the air between us heavier. "You don't have to leave yet," I said softly. It wasn't a question. It was more like offering permission to share the space, to acknowledge the tension we'd been holding without naming it. She glanced up, meeting my eyes for a long beat, and I saw it there. The recognition that whatever this was, it had grown beyond us pretending it didn't exist. There was no rush, no need for words, just the slow, steady pull of something inevitable. We moved closer without thinking, drawn by the quiet gravity of the room. I noticed her hand, resting on the stool beside her, fingers just barely brushing the edge of mine. I let my hand hover for a moment before letting it touch hers. Light, deliberate, a small acknowledgement that we were both present, both aware, both willing. She didn't pull away. Instead, she exhaled slowly, a sound of relief or surrender. I couldn't tell, and shifted slightly, letting our hands remain connected without a word. The subtle warmth of her skin under mine spoke more than anything either of us could say aloud. We stayed like that, side by side, the world outside the shop reduced to the soft hum of machines and the occasional creak of the building settling. No declarations, no promises, just the quiet understanding that neither of us would be pretending anymore. Not about this, not about the way we felt. "I don't think I can pretend anymore," she whispered finally, just above the hum of the shop. Not a confession of love, not a demand, just a truth shared between two people who had been circling each other for too long. "I know," I replied. And that was enough. Enough that we could exist in this shared space. Enough that we could let the tension settle into something soft, steady, real. Her fingers tightened around mine for a heartbeat, then relaxed. I brushed the back of her hand with my thumb, careful, almost reverent, and she leaned her shoulders slightly toward me. Not a head on my chest, not a kiss, just a tilt, just the faintest concession to the closeness we'd been avoiding, a small seal on a long unspoken understanding. Time seemed to slow, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt that the distance between us was gone. Not erased, not perfectly solved, but acknowledged, accepted, shared. We didn't speak again. We didn't need to. The quiet, the touch, The way we simply existed side by side said everything the words never could. When she finally rose to leave, our hands slipped apart reluctantly, and I watched her move with a sense of calm finality. The tension had shifted, evolved. No dramatic gesture, no fairy tale flourish, just the quiet certainty that what had been impossible to name was now undeniable. And as the door closed softly behind her, I whispered, almost to myself, but meant for both of us. Not yet, but always. I still remember that night at the shop, the quiet that settled after everything we hadn't said finally became everything we didn't need to. Time has passed, but the memory hasn't dulled. In some ways, it's sharper now. The way her hand felt against mine, the soft tilt of her shoulder, the faint exhale that seemed to release more than just breath. I've thought a lot about what changed that evening. I know I did. I learned how to wait, how to notice, how to let someone carry their own weight while still offering support. And I think she learned something too. How to let someone in, even when walls felt safer, even when history whispered caution. Love, I realized, isn't fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it's shared silence, small touches, and the courage to exist honestly in the same space. We never needed to declare anything beyond that evening. Our connection didn't explode into dramatic confessions or sudden perfection. It settled, like rain soaking into parched earth, slow, quiet, inevitable. We had earned it. Every hesitant glance, every half-smile, every whispered not yet that had stretched into months of careful closeness. Now, when I see her, walking into the shop, pausing in that familiar way, or laughing softly at some mundane comment, I recognize the evolution in both of us. She is still fierce, still self-contained, but softer too, more willing to let the moment exist without defense. And I am no longer impatient, no longer trying to force outcomes. I can simply be near her, and it is enough. Sometimes I catch myself replaying those early moments, the touches that lingered just a heartbeat too long, the silences that carried more meaning than words ever could. And I smile, because every moment led to this quiet, grounded reality. We didn't rush. We didn't perfect anything. We simply learned to hold the space for each other, and that has changed everything. Love, it turns out, isn't about dramatic confessions. It's about noticing the tremor in a hand, the fatigue behind a smile, the subtle surrender in someone's gaze, and being present anyway. That's the part one hope viewers take with them. It's okay to move slowly, to respect the unspoken, to cherish the small, seemingly insignificant gestures that quietly define a bond. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is hushed and I think of her, I still hear her whisper in my memory, "Not yet." And I know it was never about the timing. It was about the patience, the presence, and the trust that what is meant to happen will, in its own quiet, undeniable way. So, to anyone watching, notice the little things. Pay attention to the silences, the half-smiles, the fleeting touches. That's where the truth hides. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's where love quietly grows. Have you ever felt a connection like that? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your story.